by my count, and I'm going to have to double check this, I think this is the 9th annual Yom Hashoah program at New York Medical College. This is, to my mind, one of the most important events that we hold during the year. It's very meaningful, and I'm actually really glad to see people back in person, as I think it just means so much more and has a lot more impact. I have a little bit of time. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I decided, is to go through the agenda quickly, introduce the speakers, and then the speakers will address the, come up to the podium at the correct time. So after I finish my welcome, we will have Ann Bajewski do the candle lighting. Ann is the director of the Touro Institute on Human Rights and the Holocaust at Touro University. That will be followed by the keynote lecture by Dr. Edward Halperin, who probably most of you know is the chancellor and the chief executive officer at NYMC, which will be followed by a response by Margot Laurie, who is a third-year medical student here at New York Medical College, who some of you might remember from the program last year as well. So we're really happy that she's back. And we'll have a short 10-minute Q&A. Everyone can go ahead and who's online can use the question and answer function in the Zoom software to enter your questions, and we will have a both in-person and online Q&A session. And then we'll have final remarks and prayer by Rabbi Krupka, who last I saw was giving blood out in the lobby. So hopefully he's a fast bleeder. For those of you who will be seeking CME, the information is on the slide. You'll see this a couple more times, but use the QR code or text the code that you see on the screen in order to submit for your CME. I also want to mention, when we do after the candle lighting and Ann lights the candle, anybody who would like to light a candle in memoriam, please step forward when the moment strikes you to light a candle as well. You don't necessarily have to do it right away. You can light the candle immediately after Ann or at any time.
Who am I to speak of a time of families crushed, of crimes of humankind, of children in hiding and living in fear, of mothers trying to hide all their tears, of fathers praying to an empty heaven, of people dying again and again? Who am I to know what it was like to be persecuted by day and trapped by the night, to be surrounded by a world turned upside down, to be starved and tortured and beaten to the ground, to witness a nation of hate marching past, to see all their dreams broken and shattered like glass? Who am I to mention their suffering and pain, the ghettos, the camps, life and death inhumane? I wasn't even born. I wasn't even there. It happened long ago. It couldn't happen here. Who am I to know what God had in mind when the virtues of man were buried alive, when good lost to evil and hope turned to despair, when hell upon earth seemed everywhere? But who am I to let their memories be forgotten, to say and do nothing as if it never happened, to forsake the loss of our Jewish family, to live in a world of complacency? We light this yellow candle to rekindle God's flame, to shine his light upon the world once again, to sanctify the memories of the millions of souls, to honor their prayers and all their lost goals. We bless their existence by being alive, to light this yellow candle as proof we survived.
And thank you, Marie. Thank you, as always, for organizing this, and good afternoon. This afternoon, I want to chat with you about some new scientific research which makes the story of the Dachau Ashes, which was analyzed with the participation of New York Medical College, and which were buried in 2014, both more complex and more sinister than the story I told you 9 years ago. My name's Edward Halperin. I want to thank the support of the Miriam Popak Chair of Biomedical Ethics in the Holocaust and the Hearth and Samowitz Center for Medical Humanities and Holocaust Studies at Touro and New York Medical College. I do not have any conflicts of interest to discuss in regards to today's remarks. The two words concentration camp enter the English language as a result of the Anglo-Boer Wars of 1899 to 1902. The British government attempts to subjugate Afrikaners in the southern tip of Africa. The Boers put up a far more aggressive and successful guerrilla warfare opposition than the British had expected. The war drags on, and the British come up with a new idea to break the back of Boer resistance. They decide to round up women and children and place them in concentration camps with the goal of making the men want to stop fighting. This French cartoon makes fun of British gallantry with the incarceration of women and children. These concentration camps are tent camps at the tip of Africa, including massive ones, while the British do not engage in anything equivalent to gas chambers or firing squads. Food shortages are rampant, as you can see from this starving child in one of these concentration camps, and there are large numbers of deaths of women and children. The development of German concentration camps and killing factories follows the expansion of German territory after the rise of Hitler in 1933 and expansion into Austria, Czechoslovakia, and the Sudetenland. Eventually, there are many concentration camps and subcamps. The most famous, Majdanek, Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Mauthausen, and as you can see, in the southwest corner of Germany, Dachau. The Dachau camp is located in a residential area near railheads for the easy transport of those to be incarcerated in the camp. There is a gate at Dachau like the gate at Auschwitz, Arbach macht frei, and in April 1945, the United States infantry liberates Dachau. The infantry encounters stacks of bodies in railroad cars. Gas chambers labeled in German, Brassbaud shower. A US Army officer loses control of himself and his troops, and they open fire on German guards trying to surrender. The only known episode of this happening. Eventually, a colonel arrives to put a stop to the shooting of the German guards. The United States Army at Dachau finds crematoria, smokestacks, gas chambers, and gas storage units. The United States Army finds living skeletons. Some of the prisoners are ambulatory and able to welcome the liberating US forces. Some show the US forces around the property. Among the US soldiers shown Dachau was a North Carolina repairman for addressagraphs. Remember addressagraphs? His name was Walter Corsby. Mr. Corsby was given a cylindrical lump of material and told that these were ashes from the crematoria. American soldier, keep these as a souvenir of what you saw here. He put them in his metal cigarette case. He took them home and put them in his nightstand where they remained for 30 years. Eventually, they were transferred from his metal cigarette case to a plastic box and were inherited by his son, Joseph Coresby, who tried to donate them to the U.S. Holocaust Museum. They wouldn't take them, saying they didn't take alleged human remains. He tried to give it to Dachau's museum, and they said, these are not, can't be crematoria ashes. These are crematoria concrete tags, and we don't want them. Many American soldiers took them as souvenirs. Mr. Coresby gives the material to his cousin. His cousin knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, and asked to have coffee with the director of the North Carolina Holocaust Speakers Bureau, Sharon Halperin. They meet at a Starbucks, and she pushes a little plastic box across the table past the plastic paper cups of coffee. Mrs. Halperin puts them in her purse, and they end up on my kitchen table. I take a look at them and get out my camera and start taking pictures of what looked to be a small lump of concrete or limestone. It's white. It clearly has some kind of indentation. It has a rounded edge. It looks like it's got a hole at one end, as if it might have been half a hole. I turn my camera and take a picture from a different angle, and you can see the indentation of the surface and that it's semicircular. And then I remember that I took pathology as a fourth-year medical student, and you're supposed to take pictures of pathologic specimens with a ruler. So I get out my grade school ruler, which is still in the drawer, and decide I take a good-looking pathology picture to show that it's about 1 inch across. You want to laugh that I still have a ruler in inches, guilty as charged. Jay Fallon, the chairman of pathology, puts me in contact with some folks, and I take the specimen to the Milton Halperin Institute of Forensic Medicine, the office of the chief medical examiner of the city of New York, the police pathology laboratories. There I meet Bradley Adams on the left of the image, physical anthropologist, the man whose job it is when a body washes ashore or skeletons are found by the police, and you read the body is of a 15 to 25-year-old female who the medical examiner thinks died in such and such a way. That's Bradley Adams. In the middle is Donald Siegel, biochemist who is developing techniques for the identification of human protein in the ashes of the Twin Towers from 9/11. And on the right is Kevin Alter, who at that time was an undergraduate in NYSCAS at Touro and is now a surgical resident at WMC, working as a research assistant on the project. X-rays of the specimen found no bony fragments. Dr. Adams and Dr. Siegel told me that there was no likelihood of finding any DNA since there were no large bony fragments on the X-ray. They offered the technology of using protein spectroscopy on the specimen to look for human protein since we couldn't look for DNA. In order to make sure that there wasn't a false positive from surface contamination, we split the specimen in half and took samples from the middle. Proteomic mass spectrometry was used. You will remember that proteins have an amino and a carboxyl group, and then an R group, which decides whether it's proline or leucine or alanine or cysteine or cysteine. These protein amino acids are strung together, and then in a secondary and tertiary and quaternary way, they fold together to make proteins. Proteins are shared throughout mammals. We have lots of proteins which are shared with horses and monkeys and bears. Proteins are particularly conserved for bone. But of course, when you analyze these specimens, if they tell you that the specimen is from Europe, you can make the artificial intelligence a bit easier if you say you don't need to look at Australian mammals, for example, if it's a European specimen. Mass spectroscopy involves taking the proteins, denaturing them, separating out the peptides, creating an electrospray ionization, and seeing how they group. We established that both on the surface of the specimen and in the middle of the specimen, It was full of human protein. We have a specimen with human protein, no matter what the Dachau Museum said. Now what? I consulted several historians, including Professor Karen Shapiro at Duke, a history professor, and she reminded me that Native American remains, for example, there was much controversy about them being displayed in museums, and that we should photograph the specimen, analyze the specimen, retain material, but that it really ought to be buried. The trump card was the Coresbys. Mr. Coresby, who's seated, was actually the owner of the specimen. This is his cousin, Marinda, in the white blouse, and in the peach-colored dress is my wife, Sharon. Mr. Coresby is an evangelical Christian, and he said, I want this buried in sanctified ground, and I want to witness it myself. With the approval of the rabbis of Durham, North Carolina, arrangements were made for a burial ceremony in 2014. Several hundred people gathered at the cemetery. Sharon was the master of ceremonies to explain what was about to happen. A retired professor at Duke, an amateur woodworker, constructed this casket. The mayor of Durham, Mr. Bell, came and made a touching speech where he said, you know, politicians like me get told to come to things like this, say the Pledge of Allegiance and leave. But I see what's going on here today, and I want to say that I'm not going anywhere. And I am pleased and proud that the city of Durham can have some role in what's about to happen. Members of the veterans group showed up to cover the casket with a flag and present the flag to the Coresby family. In the middle image is the president of the Durham Hevra Kadisha, Professor Clapper, holding the casket, handing it from the family to him. You can see that the funeral home contributed their effort to dig a grave, and the grave was then filled in by hand by some people and with shovels. There were Holocaust survivors there, including Rebecca Hausner, an Auschwitz survivor. I heard comments like, I didn't get to bury my mother. I didn't get to bury my sisters or brothers. Maybe that's what I'm doing today. Maybe I'm getting some closure. Michael Israel, listening to this whole story, said to me, well, no one would mistake me for anybody who's religious, but let me get this right. Of all the people in the world, this just happens to show up in Western North Carolina. And it just happens to get handed over in a Starbucks, and it just happens to get handed over to your wife, who just happens to be head of the Holocaust Speakers Bureau, who just happens to be married to someone who works at New York Medical College. And any normal person would have said, well, this is interesting. But Edward Halperin's the only person I know who's strange enough to say, oh no, let's take it to the police laboratory and analyze it. I'm not religious, but I don't really think this is a set of random events. A year later, after a request for proposals was sent out, a sculptor in North Carolina, in Carborough, North Carolina, Michael Roy, received the award to create a memorial. You can see him installing it, and he had created a metal bowl for stones for people who wanted to place stones at the memorial. This is Rabbi Jennifer Feldman holding the microphone while my wife was once again master of ceremonies. This is Mr. Roy, the artist, explaining what he did and why he did it. And to give you an idea of the emotion of this burial and then the unveiling a year later, I took this candid photograph. This is the widow of Rabbi Stephen Sager, Sabina Sager. You can look at the look on her face and the way she's standing. You can get some idea of the way people felt at these ceremonies. And so the Holocaust Speakers Bureau placed a descriptive plaque on an iron fence in the cemetery, and the memorial was unveiled. For the next 8 years, every now and then, we would get phone calls from a school teacher saying, I want to bring a school group to hear about this. And they would go to the Durham Hebrew Cemetery, and either Sharon or I would be the tour guide. And people like me would take a picture of a high school class that had come to hear about the New York Medical College Dachau Ashes. And that seemed to be the end of the story until it wasn't. I got an email in July from Professor Siegel about the New York Medical College Ashes. And he said, you know, we thought it might have been some kind of disc or a piece of concrete. Edward, we found 4 other ones. As you can see, they're all circular discs, and they have numbers embedded in them, and they all have holes. And the external circumference matches the circumference of the New York Medical College disc, and so does the indentation. I think you've got a fragment of one of these. We found 2 of them in a museum in Cape Town and 2 of them in Yad Vashem in Israel. The specimens that were found, one was donated by a journalist to Yad Vashem. He was told by Poles that it was covered in fat and used as artifactual soap to be given to those being sent to the gas chambers. Donated to Yad Vashem by a resident of Jerusalem who said it was a bar of soap, has numbers on it. Donated to Yad Vashem from Auschwitz, no comment. Found in a flea market in Illinois, told by the seller it was a tag for belongings given to Jews who deposited their belongings before they entered the gas chambers. In the Polish Museum at Medinec, found during excavations at Belzec, we think Germans used them at the Belzec death camp as a kind of receipt for valuable items which people brought with them, part of a procedure before sending people to the gas chambers. If you photograph the specimen which I showed you and line it up with the South African ones, you see this notch, which I showed you in the pictures I took on my kitchen table. The notch matches a half a circle. The circumference is the same. You can't see any numbers on our specimen, but the geometry matches. They're all some kind of crumbling concrete. Proteomic mass spectrometry was done on 5 specimens. Our New York Medical College specimen and 4 others from South African museums and in Israel. 3 from Dachau, 1 probably Auschwitz, 1 from Arienburg. Now, we know that the Germans were always worried about a stampede of people on the way to the gas chambers and tried to figure out ways to get people to go to the gas chambers without a stampede or a riot. We know that the Germans had so-called crematoria tags in the 1930s. If they executed a psychiatric patient or an autistic child and the family wanted the ashes back because they lied and said that the child died of infectious disease, they labeled the bodies with these crematoria tags with numbers on them. So we know they had some kind of technology to that extent. We know from proteomic mass spectrometry that all 5 specimens that were analyzed have mammalian protein most consistent with human protein. There is overlap with other species, but the strongest evidence is for the New York Medical College specimen, but all the other specimens on the surface and in the middle have human protein. I cannot tell you if it's from 1 person or 20 people. I cannot tell you if it was from Russian prisoners of war, incarcerated homosexuals, Jews. The Germans had many people in concentration camps, political prisoners. I can't tell you. I can tell you it's human protein. Okay, so they're full of human protein. And then I started to think tags. Some people say they were coat checks. They were trying to get people to go into the gas chambers. Who would I find who knows all about cement? Is there such a thing as a professor of cement? There are civil engineering professors who teach classes like Cement and Building Materials 101. There are such people. And I went and found them. I called the Portland Cement Association of the United States and said, I'd like to speak to the director of research of the Portland Cement Association of the United States. And he was very nice to me, and he listened to my story and told me all about cement and mortar and concrete. And I called the chairman of the civil engineering department at Duke and said, who teaches Cement 101, please? I'm a retired Duke professor. I want to know all about cement. And for those of you who've been missing your episodes of This Old House, we've got three things in this world. We got Portland cement. You mix Portland cement with sand and water, that's mortar. That's how you build a brick wall. You take Portland cement and mix it with pebbles, stones, that's called concrete. The pebbles and stone make it stronger, and that's how you build roads and buildings. Just sand, mortar, stones, it's concrete. But engineering professors don't call it stone. They call it aggregate. You put aggregate in the Portland cement, and that's how you make concrete. I found papers in the civil engineering literature that report that in Africa, where it is difficult to have trucks and roads to go to quarries and bring you truckloads of gravel to make inexpensive concrete, you use domestic animal bones as a source of aggregate. Bones from your dead cow or goat or sheep. I learned in my research that it's really easy with bombing to knock out a cement factory. It's a very rigorous production line. When the Allies start dropping bombs on German cement concrete manufacturing facilities in 1944-45, there's a shortage of concrete in Germany. So we now have to look at the documentary evidence. And the documentary evidence is we have testimony from survivors. Put your clothes over there when you take a shower so you can get them back. There are numbered coat hooks over there. Remember your number. Here's a coat check. Take this into the shower and you'll come back and get your clothes. These are techniques to prevent a stampede. Numbered coat pegs. Arrange your clothes. Here's a coat check. Or you're going to take a shower. Here's soap. These circular pieces of concrete, which I've shown you, appear to have been deceptive coat checks or soap covered in fat for the purpose of getting people to walk into the gas chambers disguised as showers. I still, however, have to explain if that's what they were, why are they full of human protein? How are they manufactured? What about manufacturing caused them to be full of human protein? As best as we can understand this with my collaborators, the Germans didn't use pebbles or gravel in the aggregate. They used human bone. This is concrete made with human bone, almost certainly from concentration camp victims for the fabrication of these devices. Human bone was plentiful. It required no transportation during the war. The Nazis clearly had no compunction about using the hair or gold teeth of concentration camp victims. One would not expect them to have any hesitancy in using human bone for making concrete. This afternoon, I have told you that the New York Medical College Durham Dachau Ashes contain human protein. That was true in 2014. I can confirm now it's still true. The specimen that was buried in 2014, following a ruling by Rabbi Graber, was the burial of human remains. 4 other specimens found in museums in South Africa and Israel were similar in geometry to this specimen and are full of human protein. They've now also been buried. I thought in 2014 when I spoke to you that this was compressed ashes from the crematoria. I think I was wrong. I think it's concrete, where in my best judgment, human bones were used as the aggregate. One presumes the bones came from concentration camp victims. It was plentifully available form of aggregate. I cannot tell you at what years these were fabricated. Is it possible that some of the protein was from human ashes that got ground into the concrete over time from repeated use? Perhaps. They were either coat checks to get people to walk into the gas chambers, or they were covered with fat as surrogates for soap. I think the story I've told you this afternoon illustrates the concept that everything that needs to be written, said, or spoken about the Holocaust has been said is wrong. New scientific techniques will continue to aid our understanding. And maybe the story I've told you is a reason why we need universities like Touro and New York Medical College, where there are people interested in conducting inquiries of this type and financially supporting this type of work. If this topic interests you for further reading, the most important paper is by Dr. Siegel and his colleagues. The first author is Yang. It appeared a few months ago in Nature Scientific Reports. It's easy to find online on the Nature website. An article in the New York Times about the funeral was written by a reporter, Friedman. It's also available online. The paper which Kevin Alter and I wrote about what our knowledge was of the material at the time we wrote it is easily available online in the Journal of the Pharaohs. Thank you for your attention, and Margot will offer a response to what we've just heard.
Thank you. I have no conflicts of interest nor disclosures to make. It's hard to find words to encompass the depths of the atrocities committed by the Nazis. When Dr. Halperin first told me about these findings, my initial reply was, "This is unbelievable." Not as in this is disputable, because you and I have just seen the undeniable scientific proof, but unbelievable in the sense that every time I think I have understood the barbarity of the Holocaust, there is more that has yet to be discovered. The story of the Holocaust isn't over, and it never will be. We will continue to find victims, we will continue to tell their stories, and we will continue to remember. The publication of this paper and the substantiation of protein recovery is an exemplary model of our obligation to use scientific methods to document history. Additionally, it demonstrates how new technology can continue to change our understanding of the past. We may never identify these victims individually, but through this discovery, they have regained a voice, and we bear witness to their suffering. This paper also sets a precedent for how to appropriately examine and handle human remains from the Holocaust, as these specimens are not the only recent discoveries. In 2014, over 16,000 bone fragments thought to be from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute of Anthropology, Human Heredity, and Eugenics were discovered on the Dahlem campus in Berlin during construction. The institute housed known Nazi scientists, and one of the directors of the institute, Ottmar von Verschen, obtained samples and specimens from victims murdered at Auschwitz via Mengele. In 2015, an employee at the Max Planck Society archive in Berlin discovered a box of slides of human brain sections, which belonged to Julius Hallervorden, who conducted his research on the brains of the victims of the euthanasia program. He not only initiated collaboration with the Nazis by asking for human remains, but he did so without compunction. During Dr. Leo Alexander's inquiry into Nazi war crimes, Hallervorden stated, quote, "Where these brains came from and how they came to me was really none of my business," end quote. In July 2015, parts of the remains of Menachem Tafel, who was murdered at Auschwitz, were discovered at an institute in Strasbourg. Unlike the discs, the remains in Dahlem were subsequently cremated, a disturbing echo of the crematoriums in the concentration camps. Additionally, the remains were buried in a Christian cemetery in March earlier this year. The exact identities of the remains in Dahlem were not pursued, but in light of the high probability that at least some of the remains belong to Jewish victims, this is far from ideal. In the light of Dahlem events, a symposium was held at the Yad Vashem Holocaust World Remembrance Center in Jerusalem in 2017. One of the outcomes from the symposium was the creation of a set of recommendations for future discoveries of human remains of Nazi victims. The recommendations are comprised of 10 basic principles, which include the following. 1, immediate securing and protection of the specimens and the surrounding site. 2, the identification and securing of any and all archival records and materials related to the discovery, including, where possible, the provenance of the specimen and the identity of the victim. 3, notification of the legal and institutional authorities, including extraterritorial authorities. 4, when the religion has been clarified, notification of the relevant religious authorities. 5, engagement with historians with expertise in the history of the institution, the era, and the specific program, i.e. anatomy, euthanasia, experimentation, etc. 6, the engagement of expert archaeologists and anthropologists or other such persons with expertise in the identification of human remains. 7, where possible, notification of family or relatives of the victim, or if these cannot be determined, relevant representatives of potential victim groups must be undertaken. Anonymized and collective burials and memorials should occur only when all attempts to identify the victims have been exhausted. 8, determination of a final resting place for the remains based on any potential known wishes of the victim and wishes of the victim's family or representative. 9, documentation of the history and identification of the remains, including the biographies of the victims. Also, exact documentation of the handling of the remains since their discovery. And finally, 10, ongoing institutional commemoration of the victims based on the documentation of the history of events that led to the demise of the victim, including that of the institutions and the organizations involved. In closing, I would like to share with you the inscription on the inside of the entrance gates at the Yad Vashem World Holocaust Remembrance Center in Jerusalem, Israel, which is thus visible as one exits the museum. Known as the prophecy of the dry bones, it reads, quote, "And I will put my breath into you, and you shall live again, and I will set you upon your own soil." Ezekiel 37:14. As we continue to find victims of the Holocaust, we owe them the dignity and respect imbued in the symposium principles and exemplified in this paper. We have an obligation to bear witness and to continue to share the stories of those who perished, thus perpetuating the prophecy of the dry bones by ensuring that their legacy lives on. And we must continue to seek out applications of advancing technologies to shine light on the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Margot. Either questions or reactions to what you've heard, just please use the microphones so that the people who are tuned in can hear what you have to say. Please.
I was just wondering if you think it's possible that the cement made from the bones weren't only used for these or I guess the soap that was used inside of the death camps. Were they possibly used in roads or for war things in the war?
If they were possibly used
They
for,
were used for the war effort, if they weren't just used in the death camps, if the cement used was.
the question was whether this fabrication of concrete was not only used for these artifactual coat checks or be covered with that for soap, but could have been used in the war effort. Well, I asked that question to the engineering professors. Concrete fabricated with bone is a source of calcium, but it makes poor quality concrete. So is it possible that it was used for making runways for military aircraft, which were then converted to civilian uses and are still in place in Germany? Is it possible that there are human bone aggregate in roads that were built in this era or buildings? The only answer I can say is it is possible. If one had no compunction about using human bone as aggregate, then apropos of what Margot said, it's possible that there's human protein all over Germany and Austria and Poland that was used. And this could be an area of further research with the techniques available.
My comment is that it seems to me that it's an awfully cruel ruse, and in addition to it's insult to injury. It's not. This is a comment, not a question, but I find that the idea of using human remains then to perpetuate the the creation of human remains is an awfully cruel ruse.
Yeah, Marie, I mean, one's reaction to the story is just when you think the story couldn't get any worse, it gets even worse. You know, when I explained to Margot what I was going to say a couple of days ago, so she could start thinking about it, when she said, this is unbelievable, but not, she just said, not unbelievable as I don't believe you made that up, but, you know, are you kidding me? That is this the level to which human beings could sink? Yeah. Please come to the microphone because people won't be able to hear you online.
Hello, thank you very much. I just was going to add to what Marie said, and that is, as I'm sitting here listening to what you presented, I have goosebumps because it is the most heinous, evil irony of all. And that is just really my own reaction. I'm sitting here really thinking to myself, is this really what it was they were used for? And that is just my comment. Just very impressive in a negative way. So thank you for that. Thank you for the presentation.
Please.
Question here. Thank you, first of all, for the moving presentation. I found it especially meaningful last year when we did the history of medicine course that we had co-chaired by you and Dr. Ray. We had kind of mentioned it during the nature of the course last year. And this kind of adds another layer of meaning into the weight and that history bears as practicing physicians. What would you say is the impact of this discovery of and in terms of us being more compassionate and humanistic physicians beyond providing pharmacologic and other therapeutic interventions?
One way of grappling with your question is to say that what you just heard is the end result of eugenics in medicine. The idea that survival of the fittest also applies to collective population groups, that the coining of eugenics by Francis Galton then leads to let's promote some people having babies and let's discourage other people from having babies. Then it leads to doctors recommending judicial enforced sterilization against people's will. And the conclusion from this line of thinking is, well, if it's okay to sterilize people, then maybe there's some people who should just be prevented from reproducing by getting rid of them because they have life unworthy of life. So the fingerprints of medicine are all over those discs because it was geneticists and doctors interpreting Mendelian genetics and Charles Darwin to give us this kind of intellectual justification for this. What is the lesson for physicians? Be wary of what you say, think, and write, lest you impale your immortal soul on it.
And there was just one question it's actually another comment that says you'd have to wonder how they made the selections of which persons who would not be cremated and selected for bone use.
Well, we have mass cremations of victims in the killing factories. These ashes and crushed bones are then placed in dumps until the war gets near the end, where bodies just are getting stacked up. So they have large amounts of ash. What I have learned rather macabre things in this research. What they've taught me in the medical examiner's office is that the average temperature of a crematoria of these designs was 2,000 to 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And at such temperatures, you get saponification of human fat and reduction of human tissue to ash, and you would have a large amount of bone ash. So I don't think there's any evidence of selection. It is just a mass supply readily available.
First
Yes,
off,
thank
thank
you.
you very much. I was touched by the pictures from the cemetery in North Carolina. And being this is a Yom Hashoah event, my question was not only to follow up on Mayor's question, not only as a education for future physicians, but for high school students who you are bringing to the cemetery who might in North Carolina never met a survivor, might not have have a very distant relationship to the Holocaust, to the next generation who are or generations that have removed from the Holocaust. How do you use this as I guess basically what is your speech in the cemetery in North Carolina, or what do you use this for? How do you from this go to the general picture of the Holocaust to the youth of the next generation?
Thank you, Rabbi. There are many states in the United States that have mandatory Holocaust education in the public schools. There are no states in the United States that have mandatory Holocaust education in the public schools that offer any money to pay for it. Teachers are just told to do it. So public school teachers, already exhausted by trying to meet state mandates, will sometimes look for help. Will someone help me with a lesson plan? Thus comes Millie Jasper's program in Westchester, or my wife's program in North Carolina. We will show up with World War II veterans to speak to your class. We will show up with Holocaust survivors, except the clock is ticking and there are fewer and fewer such people. In the beginning, when I witnessed these programs, they were used as anti-bullying curricula, middle school and high school students. You bring a World War II veteran in wearing his American Legion or VSW cap and say, there's a problem with bullying in this school system. You want to know what the end result is of bullying kids? I saw it with Patton's Army. Let me tell you what I saw. And if you want to see a bunch of 12 and 13 and 14-year-old little boys with their jaws open, listening to an 80-year-old combat veteran tell them the end result of bullying and get their attention, pretty effective technique. Now, however, you're relying on second generation and third generation people to tell their parents stories. These school groups that I was showing you in the pictures were from some very dedicated high school teachers who incorporated this into their world history curriculum and wanted the kids to hear firsthand stories, not just read it in a book. Preferably to hear it directly from the mouths of survivors, but if not, programs like we just showed you. Now, one would rightfully ask, does it work? This, of course, is the key question, right? Is there any long-term result of this kind of programming? This would have to be seen. But I suppose we have to start somewhere.
Okay, thank you. I think that's the end of our question and answer period. So thank you, Dr. Halperin, once again. And I'd like to invite Rabbi Krupka, Executive Vice President of Touro University.
Good afternoon. I want to be respectful of the time. I want to say thank you to Dr. Halperin, our chancellor, to Marie Asher, the head of our library here at New York Medical College. The fact that New York Medical College and Touro University is the only health sciences university that I know of that stops to commemorate Yom HaShoah is very telling and very poignant. I want to thank all of you for coming. I see members of the administration, members of the faculty, members of the shtetl, the Jewish community on campus, people who have logged on, and it's very meaningful. At each NYMC Yom HaShoah program, I've tried to share with you a personality. We throw around 6 million, almost like pocket change. 6 million, you know, it's a label. 6 million is an enormous number, an enormous number. So what I've tried to do over time is share with you a personality. And from that personality, maybe we can learn a lesson. So I prepared such a personality for you. And was very satisfied with the example. But I have to tell you, I was a little bit of, uncomfortable. Yom HaShoah on the calendar was last week. And yet we're having our program this week. That's fine. I don't think there's any one day that you could fight racism and genocide. We could do it any day of the year. But why did it have to, be a week late? And then something happened to me on Sunday that blew me away, and I want to share it with you. So I'm going to change the personality that I'm going to present to you. And then I said to myself, well, no one's going to be able to relate to this personality because it's not a famous person. And then this morning I realized that there actually may be one person on this campus who knew this personality. And if that person is listening on Zoom or in this audience, know that these words are being said with incredible reverence and respect. The name of the person who I'd like to present to you is a gentleman by the name of Yosef Stern. He was born in 1935 in a city called Prešberg or Bratislava. When he was about 3 or 4 years old, when Czechoslovakia was invaded, he, along with his family, were interred in a ghetto. As a young boy, a yellow Star of David was put on his clothing. And through a series of events, he was separated from his mother, was on a kinder transport. Many, many members of his family perished in the Holocaust. Through a series of events, he came to this country. He was the sweetest man you would ever want to meet. The man had a smile on his face. He did well in business. He gave an enormous amount to charity, but always with the stipulation, don't ever mention my name. Got married, raised a family, beautiful children. Died last week at the age of 88. He was a very organized person. I met him about 40 years ago when I was younger than some of the students sitting in this audience. I was a student at Yeshiva University, and our paths crossed, and we developed a friendship. You know how sometimes you meet someone in your life that will create an indelible impression upon you and be a guidepost. It was an incredible difference of age between us. He could have been my father. I don't think there was a time that he and I ever met as a college student or later on in life, that I wasn't greeted with the warmest smile, with a genuine affection, with a respect that was so empowering that it just lifted you up and made you want to emulate this person. So I went to the Shiva house when I heard that he had passed. It happens to be that my wife and his daughter are friends. And that's sort of how our relationship has gone for decades, is through his daughter sending regards and so on. And I heard something at the Shiva house that just blew me away. First of all, he insisted on no eulogies, and I'm hoping that I'm not violating that request that he made in his last will. But I think you'll understand because of the point that I'm going to make. You know, in Judaism, when somebody passes on, the Chaver Kedisha, the burial society, prepare the deceased. And in our tradition, things are very simple. No ornate casket, it's a very plain pine box. No fancy clothing. The burial society uses very simple linen shrouds. We believe that the body is a vessel for the soul. And as we prepare someone who's passed on, we wrap the body simply in shrouds to represent the sanctity of what this body did to house a soul through life. I'm sitting at the Shiva. I introduce myself to his two sons. He has some daughters as well. And the son tells me that part of his requests was that the burial society should attach his yellow star to his shrouds. And this is how he was brought to Kever Yisrael, to his Jewish burial. Now, on a theological level, I can imagine that the inspiration was someone who's gone through the Holocaust comes to the heavenly tribunal, looks at somebody with a yellow star, says, "Sir, whatever you've gone through in life, whatever you've done, you're forgiven." Straight into the Garden of Eden. But knowing the personality and the way he lived his life, I'd like to offer another explanation. What started off as a mark of degradation, this yellow star, was now elevated to a badge of honor. Someone who went through the horrors of the Holocaust, but yet was able to live his life with a positive attitude, with a desire to bring goodness to this world, to overcome the adversity and make this world a better place. As he ascends to the heavens, he's now worn that badge of honor. I could have been bitter. I could have been full of hate. And yet I embraced humanity. I embraced my people. I helped. I made this world a better place in spite of the horrors that human beings can visit on one another. Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest there can be no better, no greater lesson for us on this health sciences campus. Take the lessons that we have learned the impact of the slides that we saw in Dr. Halperin's presentation and Margot's response. Yes, there is evil in this world. There is racism in this world. There are horrible people that do horrible things, but we will make it better. That's what we stand for. That is who we are. In Hebrew, there is a word, lekach neitzarnu. For this we were created. The Talmud tells us in Bava Basra, in the tractate of the Talmud in Bava Basra, there is no greater level of sanctity than giving one's life in martyrdom. We've heard that out there. And yet there is one greater level of sanctity. And that's living one's life with a sense of purpose, with a sense of sanctity, with a sense of goodness, so that the world today is a better place because of what we have contributed to society as a whole and to our communities in particular. That's the lesson. Again, I thank you all for participating. We will have Paul Glasser, who's an accomplished cantor, recite the memorial prayer in its original. I will read it in the English. And you know what? Today's a good day to do something good. So I don't know if they're still set up out there and if you're capable, but if anybody wants to donate blood, it's a perfect day to do it. They have great cranberry juice, I can tell you.
Please rise.
He doesn't.
שוכן במרומים, אמיצי מנוחה נכונו, על כנפי השכינו, במעלוס קדושים וטהורים, כזר הרקיע מזהירים. אס נשמוס הקדושים והטהורים, שהוא מסור, ושנהרגו ונשחטו, ושנשרפו ושנטבחו, ושנחנקו על קדושת השם. בעבור שאנחנו נוצבים צדקו ועד נזכור נשמו ישראל, וגן עדן די מנוחה סוף. לא כן בעל הרחמים יסתירם, וססר כנפיו לעולמים. ויני ויצרור בצרור החמס נשמוסם. אדוני הוא נחלו סון, וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם, ונאמר Amen.
O God, full of mercy, who dwells on high, grant prosper rest on the wings of the divine presence, in the lofty levels of the holy and the pure ones who shine like the glow of the firmament for the souls, the holy and pure ones who were killed, murdered, slaughtered, burned, drowned, and strangled in sanctification of your name. May their resting place be in the Garden of Eden. Therefore, may the Master of Mercy shelter them in the shelter of his wings for eternity. May he bind their souls in the bond of life. The Almighty is their heritage, and may they repose in peace on their resting places. Let us all say amen. Thank you all for coming.